Today I'm gonna show you my round 3 game from Kadetska Liga. So, as you might remember, Kadetska Liga is a team competition and our team has managed to win both 2 matches with a perfect score. So let's see what happened today. So I was having the white pieces against Leonard. This is like 10 or 11 Russian child, I believe, and I played the move 1e4. And of course, Kadetska Liga is a classical chess tournament, over the board chess tournament, and is of course rated for the classical FIDE rating. So after e4, my opponent played the move pawn to c6, and I knew that he plays the Caro-Kann. Of course, pawn to c6 against e4 is known as the Caro-Kann. He will play the move pawn to d5 next move, and against Caro-Kann I like to play d4, the main line, and after d5, here is where Caro-Kann branches out. I have few options. I can take the pawn, I can play e5, the advanced variation, or I can play knight to c3, just defending the pawn, and this is the main line theory. But I play against the Caro-Kann this move pawn to f3, and this is known as the fantasy variation. This is very tricky variation, and of course the idea being after f3, if my opponent takes the e4 pawn, I will take back with the f pawn, of course, and we'll have this massive pawn center. So after the move f3, my opponent was thinking for about 15 minutes, obviously not knowing what he will play, and then he played the move pawn to e5 here. Of course, the best move is to take the e4 pawn, but against the f3 Caro-Kann, of course, the fantasy variation, this move e5 is possibility, and of course the best move is to take the pawn simply. And now I expected him to play the move queen to b6 or bishop to c5, and this is the theory. This is the most tricky of them all. Of course, the most tricky variation against the fantasy variation of the Caro-Kann, and the idea is that you are threatening to win a knight, and you will make use of this long diagonal. You will play with this battery, queen and bishop battery on this diagonal. You will play bishop f2 check, and maybe you will checkmate white in a few moves. So, of course, I was expecting queen b6 or bishop to c5, but here my opponent simply took the e4 pawn, and I thought this was a big mistake, because now, of course, I can just trade queens with the move queen takes d8, which is, of course, the great move. It is the only move in the position that is good for me, and after the trade occurs, I was thinking now, do I take the pawn, or do I play something like f4? And of course, the computer likes this move bishop c4 attacking the f7 pawn, and after my opponent would take the pawn, I would simply play knight takes f3, but I wanted to take the pawn, and of course this is okay, this is completely a reasonable move, and of course I will still play bishop c4, still attacking the pawn on f7, but of course now I have these double isolated pawns, and they will be a big target for my opponent. Of course I have an extra pawn, but these two pawns are kinda very bad. So after the move bishop c5, I play the move bishop c4, just attacking the f7 pawn, and after knight to d7 from my opponent, now I wanted to play the best move in the position, because I knew that if I wait too long, maybe even if I take the pawn on f7, that I would be kinda worse, of course. But this is kinda not reasonable from me, that I assume that I'm worse. Of course, I have these two doubled isolated pawns, but I am a pawn up, of course. If this pawn would be back on d3, of course the position would be almost winning. But of course, these two pawns are very weak, and of course, now I was deciding whether or not to play knight to f3 or to play the move bishop takes f7. And of course, I played the move knight to f3, which is the great move. This is the only move in the position that works for me. Of course, taking on f7 is kinda a mistake, because after knight takes e5, now my opponent gets a lot of initiative. And of course, my bishop is hanging. Maybe I can even take the knight, but probably the best move is to play bishop b3 here. And of course, now this isolated pawn is blockaded by his knight, and probably he will just develop. I will try to develop as well, and he will play this move rook to d8, and will have this f file for himself, and I thought this position should be worse for me, or at least equal. So I played the move knight to f3 here, simply defending the e5 pawn, and now he played the move f6, which I thought was kinda stupid from him, and of course it is the best move and I don't know anything about chess, but I thought that after I take the pawn, which I did in the game, he takes f6, and he takes back with the knight, and I simply get rid of my weakness on e5, and now that I thought that this pawn is much safer, and of course this is kinda true, but of course the knight will come here, the rook will support the knight on e5, and he will simply blockade the pawn and ultimately win this e4 pawn back. So now I played the move bishop to g5, of course my pawn on e4 is hanging, and now of course he cannot take the pawn because of this pin on the knight from f6 to the king on d8, so he played the move king to c7, which I thought was a mistake. Of course now he is threatening to win a pawn, and I didn't want to play knight to c3 because after bishop b4 then there are a lot of threats in the position, which is completely true. I assumed the position is okay for me after king to c7, and I simply play the move bishop f4 check, with the idea of then playing knight to d2 or even knight to c3 in some positions, and then he played the move bishop d6. I thought that he will simply go back and that we will repeat moves maybe, but of course bishop on f4 is better than bishop on g5, because then I can play knight to d2 and the bishop is no longer on c1, and after something like bishop to b4 I have this move pawn to c3 and the pin is no longer any dangerous. So after bishop to d6 I simply took the bishop, and of course now, of course in this position I cannot play e5, because after e5 of course you might think that I'm losing, that my opponent is losing a piece, but he can simply play rook to e8 pinning the pawn and I simply lose a pawn. So after bishop f4 and bishop d6 I simply took the bishop, and after king takes d6 now I play the move knight to c3. I thought this is very logical move. I wanted to castle long, of course, with check on the king, but the computer wants me to play bishop to d3, supporting my pawn with the bishop, and then I will play maybe even knight to c3. But I wanted to be flexible and I played the move knight to c3. In this position I wanted to castle my king as early as possible, and after rook to e8, now of course I cannot defend the pawn with any of my rooks, but this is not completely true. I simply castled and then I will support the pawn with my rooks. So after king to c7, the only move of course, sidestepping with the king, I play the move rook h to e1. Maybe even bishop to d3 was smarter, and then rook to f3 was kinda an idea from the computer, but after knight to e5 I simply play the move knight takes e5, and after rook takes e5 I simply play the move h3, not allowing any pieces to come to the g4 square. And after bishop d7 I thought my position is okay, my position should be at least slightly better or at least equal, and of course this pawn is weak, but again my opponent will have hard time winning this pawn back. So after rook to d2 my idea is of course to double up on the e-file, and after rook a to e8 I simply double up, and after bishop e6 I traded the bishops and I played the move rook to d2 here. Here I didn't really know what to do. Engine suggest to play the move pawn to a4, but here I simply played for a draw, and of course the idea is that he cannot take the pawn, because after rook to d2 I simply pin him down the e-file and he will lose material. So of course rook to d2 is simply waiting move, and of course kinda not allowing his king to step on the d-file, although that wasn't really necessary. Something like king to b1 or even a4 yes would be better. And after the move b5 from my opponent, he was playing for the win in this position, I simply played the move a3, not allowing b4 to happen. And after a5 I played the move rook d to e2, back, just defending the pawn. And now my opponent played the move before, I took the pawn. And now here is where my first kinda mistake happened. And of course the position is equal no matter what I play. I played this move knight to a2, which is not particularly good. And of course, why not? Because of course I'm attacking the b4 pawn, and I thought that he will simply take, the opponent will simply trade off everything, and I was counting on winning this pawn back, and this endgame is, of course, at least slightly better for white. He is playing for the win, but of course the position should end in a draw with perfect play. But of course after knight to a2 I missed this move pawn to c5. Of course he can wait one move and he will capture the move, capture the pawn one move later. So here I was kinda panicking a little bit. Of course I was losing this e4 pawn, but I thought that I'm still at least equal, and I played the best move in the position. I played the move pawn to b3, of course preparing king b2 and c3 to put my knight back into the game. Of course knight on a2 is very bad piece for now. And now I thought he will take the pawn with maybe with his rook or maybe even with his pawn. But he played this very awkward move rook to a6, which is a big mistake. He could just equalize the game by taking the pawn. But he played rook a6. I don't know what he thought I will play. Maybe he thought my knight is trapped, which is completely true. But I can still defend the knight with my king, with the move king to b2. And now I'm preparing the move pawn to c3. And now he simply retreated his rook to e6. And now I simply won a tempo. Now I can play c3, and after retreat of course I will take back with the knight, and of course now the e4 pawn is simply defended. And after king to c6 I thought my position should be better. Of course I'm playing for the win here, but of course the game should end in a draw pretty quickly. So after king to c2 he played the move rook to e8, maybe preparing rook to a8. So I played king to b2, just repeating moves I thought will make a draw here. But now he played the move rook to b8. Now I simply played the move king to c2 back. And after rook b4 I played the move rook to a1. And of course he cannot take the pawn because of the pin once again. And the king cannot go to d5 because of my knight, of course. So after the move pawn to c4 we traded pawns, and I play king to d3, excuse me. And after rook to b4 I play the move rook to a4. And the computer doesn't quite like the move rook to a4. He thinks that I have a big, not a big, but a small advantage after the move rook to a6 check. And he thinks this position should be around +1, and that I am the one who is fighting for the win. But I didn't really understand what to do after king to c5, although king to c5, maybe I have knight a4. No, I simply double up on the a file and threaten mate. This is kinda logical, of course. So after the move rook to b4 I should have give this check and force king back to b7, and then I would maybe play rook to something like rook to a4 back. But I play rook to a4 and I'm still plus 0.5. This is kinda equal. And after retreat occurs, he played the move rook a5. I simply retreated my knight to c3. And after knight to d7, I could play something like knight to d5 and then rook c2, but I don't know. I simply play the move rook a2. And of course, if my opponent takes, then the position is still equal, but I'm the one pressing for the win. Of course, I have this passed pawn, but of course the position should end in a draw pretty quickly. So after rook to a2, he played the move rook to g5. This is kinda nice idea, pressuring my g2 pawn. Now I played this passive move. I played the move rook to e2. Definitely not the best. I should bring up my king towards f3 square, and then supported by my two pawns, my king would be completely safe here. But I played rook e2 and he played the move rook g3 check, and now I made my first big mistake. My coach after the game told me that this was kinda crucial mistake in the game. Not that that I'm losing after this move, but it's kinda hard to play the position after the move I played. Of course now I have the choice. Do I go up do I go up or do I go down? And of course the correct answer is to go up with the king to d4 or maybe to c4 even, but I played the move king to c2, and of course the position is still equal after king to c2, but now his king will just come to e5, maybe to d4 later on, and this rook will simply stay on the third rank, and my king will be simply stranded on the back of my position. So after king to c2, he played the move knight e5, simply trying to play maybe even some ideas of knight to g5 later on, or even simply blockading this pawn on e4. And after knight to d5, he simply played the move king to c5, and now I started to feel kinda bad that I played king to c2 rather to play king to d4. So I was kind of panicking in this position, but I thought this position should be at least a draw, and after knight e3, my idea was to play knight to f5, of course, just forking rook and pawn and kind of forcing rook to go back to from the third rank, but my opponent played this very good move, pawn to g6. And of course the position is still equal, but of course it is kind of harder to play if you are white in this position. So I played the move king to d2, and after king to d4 I gave this check, and after king to c5 I simply played the move knight to e3 back, and he played the move h5, and now I should just wait with my knight and draw would be kinda easy. Knight c2 and knight to e3 should be a drawing technique, but I play the rook to e1, still okay, and after knight to d7 I play the move rook c1 check, which is not particularly good anymore, because I allow king to d4 to happen on the board, and I don't have this check because my pawn just is undefended, and I would lose the pawn, but the position would probably still be okay. So rook e1 was played, preparing knight to c2 check, and after the move knight to c5, here is where I made my big mistake. Of course, the only drawing move in the position is the move knight to c2, and I saw that move, and I don't know why I didn't play it. And of course, after knight to c2, excuse me, his king just need to stay on e5 square, and this knight is simply not allowing king to come any closer, and of course the pawn is defended by the rook. But as you might saw earlier, I played this losing blunder. I played the move e5, and why is this completely losing blunder? Because now I was calculating after e5 that my pawn will be kinda pushing towards queening, and I only saw the move knight to b3 check, and I calculated it has to be simply a draw, because after king to c2 there is no check that he can give me, and he will simply go back, or if he takes, I will simply take, and this endgame should be completely winning for me. Of course, I will just push my pawns, and the king is no longer in time to push these pawns towards queening. And after e5, of course, I missed a very powerful move, which is knight to e4 check, of course, and now I simply lose e3 knight, and I still hoped for some miracle to occur. We both had like 5 minutes on the clock, but of course after king to d1 and rook takes e3, I simply traded the rooks, and now of course the best move in the position was to play e6. I don't know why I played the move king to e1, and now just h4, not allowing any g3 to occur on the board, and after king to f1, now he plays the move knight g5, controlling the square, and I simply have to wait with the move king to e1, and after king to f4 I play the move king to f2, and after the king took the pawn I simply play the move g3, and after knight to e4 check I simply resigned this game. So I lost to this 11-year-old kid, but I'm still kinda happy with my play. I played kinda good, but of course this move king to c2 here after this check was kinda crucial, that I had worse position, or at least kinda harder to play, and then this move e5 when I had no time was crucial for me to lose this game. So of course this was a team competition, as I mentioned earlier, and our team drew the third round of Kadetska Liga. So the two players in my team, one managed to win the game, and the player on the first board managed to draw the game. So now we have 2.5 points out of 3, and we'll still try to fight on in the last 2 rounds of Kadetska Liga. And if you like the video, make sure to subscribe to follow more such content, and see you guys in another video.